What do you think of a waterfall submerged in the sea, and a volcano that turned into a forest? And what would you say about a Hindu temple attached to mosques? This is just a taste of Mauritius, a place where things just don't make sense, and maybe that's exactly why it makes so much sense to visit. And that's where Bello Mundo is taking you now. Number 1. Location and general information. Although it bears the name Islands, it's important to clarify that Mauritius is an archipelago in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's practically a lost point in the middle of nowhere. Truly lost. To give you an idea, the closest reference point is Madagascar, which is over 1,000 kilometers away. In other words, if you're looking for a remote place surrounded by sea on all sides, you've found it. There are no neighbors, there are no bridges, there are no roads connecting it to anywhere. It is a completely isolated country on the map, and that is part of its charm. The territory includes about 60 islands and islets, but 4 of them contain everything that matters: Mauritius, Rodrigues, Agalega, and Cargados Carajos. And in practice, almost everything happens on one of them: Mauritius. It has the same name as the country and is the true heart of the nation. It is where the capital, most of the population, businesses, temples, hotels, and schools are located. To get an idea of its size, the country is about 2,000 square kilometers. It is slightly smaller than Moscow, Russia, which is over 2,500. But instead of buildings and car horns, what you see are white sand beaches, tropical forests, and green mountains that look like a movie set. And there's an explanation for this cinematic view. Mauritius is a volcanic island. Long ago, what now attracts tourists from all over the world began as an explosion of lava at the bottom of the sea. The lava accumulated, forming a platform, and over time the mountains, valleys, rivers, and cliffs that enchant visitors today emerged. And the most curious thing is that even though it is small, the island has microclimates. On the coast, it is hot all year round, with steady sunshine and a sea breeze. But if you climb the mountains in the center, you may encounter fog, unexpected chilly weather, and a steaming cup of tea. All this just 20 minutes away by road. For those who enjoy natural contrasts in a compact space, Mauritius is a treat. Number 2. History. Unlike most African countries, Mauritius did not have an indigenous population. Most African countries had, at some point, native populations that lived there for centuries or millennia. With Mauritius, the story is different. When the first Europeans arrived, there was no one there. No indigenous people, no local civilization, no sign of human habitation. Just forest, exotic animals, and a clumsy bird that ended up becoming the symbol of the island, which we'll talk more about in a moment. This start from scratch shaped the country's identity in a different way. Everything here was brought from outside: the people, the religions, the languages, the customs. The first to set eyes on the island were Arab and Malay navigators back in the Middle Ages. But the first to officially arrive were the Portuguese in 1505. They saw, they took notes, but they didn't stay. Those who really tried to colonize it were the Dutch, almost a century later, who named the island Mauritius in honor of Mauricio de Nassau, the same man who, years later, would leave his mark on Brazil during the period when the Dutch ruled the region. However, the Dutch project was a failure. Droughts, cyclones, pests, lack of infrastructure. After a few frustrated attempts to plant sugarcane and raise animals, they threw in the towel and left. That's when the French came in, and they did get things going, through bloodshed. They turned the island into a sugar-producing colony, importing thousands of enslaved Africans to do the work. It was the French who placed slavery at the center of the Mauritian economy, running the plantations with forced labor for decades. It was only at the beginning of the 19th century that the British took control of the island, and it was under British rule that slavery was officially abolished in 1835. But in practice, this did not mean true freedom. What came next was another type of exploitation, the indentured labor system. The British began bringing immigrants from India, promising them wages and a new life. Many accepted the offer and crossed the ocean in search of hope. Upon arrival, they found harsh conditions, long working hours, and a completely foreign place. Even so, many stayed. They married, had children, built temples, and opened businesses. Today, about 2/3 of Mauritius's population is of Indian origin. This fact explains a lot, as you will see throughout the video. In other words, Mauritius never had an original people, but it built a unique identity, made up of encounters, overlaps, and adaptations. And since we're talking about an island that started out with no one living there, it's worth remembering an animal that lived there long before any Europeans arrived, because its story also deserves special mention. Number 3. The dodo, the bird that became a national symbol. When Mauritius was still uninhabited, a curious bird roamed peacefully around the island, the famous dodo. The dodo was a large, clumsy bird that couldn't fly, couldn't run, and apparently wasn't afraid of anything. That's because before humans arrived, there were no natural predators on the island. It lived peacefully, eating fruit, laying eggs on the ground, and going about its life, until the colonizers showed up and brought pigs, rats, dogs, and every threat the dodo was simply not prepared to face. Less than 100 years after the arrival of Europeans, it disappeared. It vanished from nature, from its nests, and from the forests. Not a single specimen remains. Everything we know today comes from reports, drawings, and a few bones that have survived the passage of time. But instead of being just a tragic reminder, the dodo has become a symbol of resistance. It appears on banknotes, signs, in museums, on souvenirs, and even as a company logo. Today, it is almost a national mascot, not just because of historical curiosity, but because it has become a living or dead warning that preservation is urgent and that we can indeed learn from the mistakes of the past. Now that you know about this powerful symbol of the island, let's find out who the descendants of this whole story are. Number 4. Population, languages, and religion. If there is one thing that defines the soul of Mauritius, it is diversity. Few places in the world have such ethnic, cultural, and religious diversity in such a small space, and living together so harmoniously. As we mentioned earlier, Mauritians do not come from a single people, but from many, and that is precisely what has built the country's unique identity. The population base came with indentured laborers from India, who arrived in their thousands in the 19th century. They replaced African slaves after abolition, and many stayed for good. As a result, more than half of the population today has Indian roots, which explains the strong presence of Hinduism, traditional clothing, and spicy cuisine. In addition, there are Muslims, Christians, mostly Catholics, Chinese Buddhists, and even some tribal beliefs that have survived over time. And the curious thing is that, even with so many differences, coexistence is peaceful. Religions share space without conflict. It is common for a neighborhood to have a mosque, a Hindu temple, and a church, all on the same street. The same goes for language. English is the official language of the government, but almost no one uses it in everyday life. In everyday life, what really happens is Mauritian Creole, a mixture of French with African, Indian, and even English words. French remains strong in the media, schools, and newspapers, and inside homes you can still hear Hindi, Urdu, or Cantonese, depending on the family's origin. In other words, Mauritius is a small country, but with a cultural richness that seems like an entire continent. and this diversity is reflected in every corner, including the calendar. Number 5. A calendar full of celebrations. With so much diversity, it is to be expected that Mauritius' calendar would be a constant celebration. And that is exactly what it is. The country celebrates Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and Chinese holidays, and almost all of them are national holidays. One of the most important is Maha Shivaratri, a festival dedicated to the god Shiva. For days, thousands of faithful walk to the sacred lake of Grand Bassin, a place surrounded by statues of gods, mist, flowers, and offerings. It is a peaceful pilgrimage, open to everyone, even those who are not Hindu. Another highlight is Kavadi, celebrated by the Tamils, a group from southern India. The festival involves music, dancing, flowers, fasting, and in some cases extreme rituals, such as walking on hot coals or piercing the body as a form of devotion. Eid al-Fitr, which marks the end of Ramadan, also brings the country to life. Families gather to pray, prepare traditional sweets, wear new clothes, and visit relatives. It is a time of joy, kindness, and abundance. During Chinese New Year, neighborhoods with a strong Asian presence, such as Port Louis and Quatre Bornes, are filled with red lanterns, lion dances, and fireworks. It is a tradition that crossed the oceans and found a home on the island. And of course, there is Christmas, celebrated with decorated trees, midnight mass, and Christmas dinner, although not everyone follows Christian customs. Many people use the date as an excuse to get the family together and, of course, eat well. But perhaps the most universal celebration in Mauritius is Holi, the festival of colors. On this date, the entire country is transformed. People cover themselves in colored powder, dance, sing, and for a few hours, any differences disappear. It's just joy, music, and a shower of color. The best part? No one is left out. Instead of each group closing itself off in its own tradition, the celebrations become bridges rather than walls. But do you think this mix is only found on the calendar? Of course not. It's on the plate, too. Number 6. Gastronomy. If there's an easy way to understand the spirit of Mauritius, it's through its food. Here, eating is more than a habit. It's part of the identity. The country's cuisine is a mix of everything: India, China, Africa, France, and even the United Kingdom. But this mishmash works. The flavors are striking, the recipes are simple, and almost everything is inexpensive and well served. On the streets, the most popular dish is dol puri, a lentil pancake stuffed with chickpeas and spicy sauces. Served on paper, it is eaten with your hands. No frills. There is also rougail, a well-seasoned tomato sauce that accompanies sausages, meat, or fish, and every family swears that their recipe is the most authentic. Another classic is Mauritian biryani, a legacy of Indian Muslims, aromatic rice mixed with meat, vegetables, or seafood. The Chinese brought bol renversé, the famous upside-down cake, made with rice, chicken, vegetables, and fried egg, assembled upside down on the plate. Those who enjoy more distinctive flavors will like vindé, made with fish or octopus, marinated in mustard, turmeric, and lots of pepper. To drink, there is local rum made from sugarcane, which has become a national symbol. And for dessert, there are sweets with coconut, cardamom, or alauda, a sweet drink full of texture. But more than what you eat, it's how you eat that matters. At home, the family eats together, with the elders coming first, and refusing food can even be considered rude. In the end, sharing a meal is almost a code here. And even with all the cultural diversity, there is one thing that unites everyone on the island: a love of good food and eating together. Number 7. Day-to-day. If the diversity of the Mauritian population is impressive, everyday life shows that this coexistence goes beyond theory. Life there has a lighter pace. No rushing, honking, or stress. Here, there is always time for a chat, a cup of tea, or a kind gesture. It is common to see relatives gathered at the end of the day on the sidewalks, chatting. Public transportation works, the streets are clean, and crime is low. Children go to school alone, the elderly stroll peacefully, and it is not uncommon to see stores open without bars, a rare sight in many countries. Education is also taken seriously. The adult literacy rate in Mauritius is high, reaching almost 92% in 2022. The educational system follows the British model, with free and compulsory education up to high school. The government also offers scholarships to study abroad, mainly in France and India. The result is clear. There are many humble people who speak 3 or 4 languages fluently. This does not come from luxury, but from a multicultural environment where learning several languages is almost part of everyday life. Even with growing tourism, the simple and polite manner of Mauritians remains strong. They know they live in a different place, and they don't want to lose that. Kindness has become almost a trademark. A shopkeeper might give you a discount just for smiling. A taxi driver might become a tour guide for fun. And a stranger might invite you to lunch as if you were family. In an increasingly fast-paced world, Mauritius reminds us that kindness and time well spent are still very valuable. Number 8. A natural laboratory. If the dodo is Mauritius' most famous figure, it is only the gateway to an ecosystem full of peculiarities. The island is literally an open-air laboratory, and that's not just a figure of speech. Scientists from all over the world have come here to study its biodiversity, including none other than Charles Darwin. During his travels through the southern hemisphere, Darwin was fascinated by the species that only exist there. Geographical isolation allowed plants and animals to evolve without outside interference, creating a unique ecosystem. The flora includes forests with extremely rare trees, some with fewer than 20 known specimens. As for the fauna, in addition to the extinct dodo, there are giant bats, colorful chameleons, shiny beetles, and endangered birds that only live there, protected by serious conservation programs. Black River Gorges National Park is the heart of this green resistance. It covers more than 6,000 hectares of native forest, with trails, waterfalls, and viewpoints where wildlife still has room to breathe. And there's more. Tourism on the island is designed not to become a threat. There are strict rules for diving, fishing, hotel construction, and even reforestation with native species. That's why Mauritius has become an example of environmental preservation in Africa. In other words, it's not just a beautiful destination in photos. It is one of the few places where nature can still be protected and admired, without haste, without destruction, and with responsibility. Number 9. From volcano to beach. Now that we've covered the location, history, and diversity of the Mauritian people, to end our trip on a high note, it's time to talk about what stands out most in any photo: the landscapes. And boy, do they disappoint. Mauritius seems to have been tailor-made to be the setting for a perfume commercial. It has white sandy beaches with coconut trees, transparent blue sea surrounded by coral reefs, green mountains covered in mist, and volcanic craters lined with tropical forest. And most impressive of all this fits into a small space. In 2 hours by car, you can leave a deserted beach, cross a colorful village, climb a mountain trail, and arrive at a waterfall hidden in the middle of the forest. One of the most emblematic places on the island is Le Morne, Brabant. In addition to being a perfect beach for those who enjoy windsurfing and kitesurfing, it is home to a mountain considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But what really went viral on social media was a visual phenomenon, the famous submerged waterfall we showed you at the beginning. From above, it looks like a waterfall is falling into the ocean. But it's not water. It's sediment sliding through a crack in the seabed, creating the illusion that the ocean is being swallowed by a hole. Nearby is Chamarel, where nature decided to play with watercolors. This is where the so-called seven-colored earth is located, a hill with strips of soil naturally colored in shades of red, violet, blue, and yellow. It looks like Photoshop, but it's 100% real. The soil, the result of ancient volcanic flows, never mixes, even when it rains. In the center of the island, Black River Gorges National Park shows another side of paradise. The climate is milder, the vegetation is dense, and there are trails that lead to viewpoints and waterfalls, created to preserve what remains of the native vegetation. The park is one of the last refuges for endangered species that live there, some of which are unique in the world. In the north, the scenery changes again. The beaches have shallow seas, calm waters, and fine sand. Grand Bay, Trou au Biche, and Perebear are the most famous among tourists, but they are still frequented by locals as well. And here comes a detail that makes all the difference. By law, no beach can be privatized in Mauritius. No five-star resorts, no millionaire mansions, no local authorities. The strip of sand is public. And that's not just nice on paper, it's a reality lived every day. In other words, it's one of the reasons why tourism works without turning the country into an elite playground. And even though tourism has grown in recent years, the pace remains the same, peaceful, simple, and unpretentious. Mauritius isn't just a beautiful destination. It's a living example that the world can work better when people stop competing and start cooperating. If there really is a paradise on Earth, it may very well be hidden in the middle of the Indian Ocean, named after an extinct bird and with the smell of curry in the air. So, had you heard about all the crazy things coming from such a small place? If you enjoyed this dive into Mauritius, leave a like, subscribe to Bello Mundo, and share it with that friend who's always dreaming of an exotic trip. Every week there's a new video here, always with stories you won't find anywhere else. See you next time.